Hello, audience. My name is Dalton Mortimer, and I am the Authenticator. And welcome back to A Mystic's Vlogs, a show where we take a relatively serious look at media with explicit fantastical or supernatural elements through a magical, mystical, mythological, folkloric, paranormal, or occultic lens. And well, sigh. They basically took the last two terrible episodes of Legends of Tomorrow and took the worst aspects of each of them, namely the fact that barely anything happened in the previous episode, and a lot of things that did happen annoyed the fuck out of me, and squished them into one episode. So let's just get into it, shall we? This is the Legend of Tomorrow for this week. For starters, I apparently need to stop making predictions or suggestions for the next episode when I do these. Because just as I alluded to in my previous episode, when I wasn't whining about how there was nothing going on, they wasted allusions to Swamp Thing. There is no Swamp Thing in this episode, but they lampshade it like a motherfucker. And I am pissed. You had John Constantine. You could have done the Swamp Thing. The movies have done it repeatedly, and those movies were on shoestring budgets for the most part, so it wouldn't have been hard to replicate with today's CGI. But no, instead of the Swamp Thing, you give me this shit to work with. Fine, show, but you are on my shit list. But we'll get into that in due course as the piss-off moments come up. With that, let's get into one of them, namely, on a date night, Sarah and Ava are watching a movie called Swamp Thing. Face, palm, nuclear explosion. Swamp Thing. I hate everything on this planet, and I want to burn it to the ground. Anyway, after I recover from the brain aneurysm induced by rage, the plot-relevant bit is that this movie from the 90s that they're watching is apparently based on a true story, in that oh-so-loose way that all based on true story movies in Hollywood, particularly based on true story horror movies, tend to be. And there's a summer camp, and basically a 90s horror movie setup, because of course, huzzah, and oh wait, yes, it's also in the 90s, so yay, 90s-ness. And we're off, because reasons, and I can't begin to articulate how just pissed off I am with this, what in all of the fuck are you doing, show? What in the cunt bubbling fuck? Anyway, the upshot is that they go off and tell the legend, and this time, yay, Ava's coming along too, and Johnny makes a reference to the fact that he knows a Swamp Thing, and I face palm with rage. Don't remind me, show. If you're not going to do this, don't poke me. This is not wise for you, show. Fuck off, show. Gah. Moving on, they need to conceal themselves as volunteer counselors, which, as if this couldn't get any worse, involves Johnny being forced to remove his stereotypical getup, including his tie. Jesus Christ, Legends of Tomorrow, are you trying to kill me with rage? Because I guarantee you that will not go well for you. As much as I have absolutely no respect whatsoever for straight ties, they are Johnny's thing, and while I often have maintained the fact that he would look better in a bow tie, as would anyone ever wearing a tie ever, I understand that he is the chaotic neutral version of me, whereas I am the lawful neutral version of him. Therefore, you can't take his tie away from him. But you do, and I'm even more pissed at you. Anyway, after we get into some of the interpersonal bullshit I don't give a fuck about, namely that Ray is all giddy over summer camp, Sarah is surprisingly giddy over summer camp, and Ava, being that she had no childhood and is a clone, is really kind of clueless and bespectacled and basically does the TV equivalent of Vin Diesel's character from The Pacifier with the children and everything, and his old drill sergeanty and whatnot. We get into the next bit of mystical bullshit. Namely, that Johnny casts a protection spell around the grounds of the camp, which involves casting a massive circle, which, thank God you finally remembered to cast one, Johnny. Although, in this case, I have to take points away because in this case, it probably would have just been better to bless the entire campground rather than keep things confined within the space of a circle. So you casted a circle in the one time where casting a circle was probably the least useful it could possibly be. And naturally, it immediately gets fucked up. But not before he completely ruined the child's childhood by basically just straight up confirming that monsters and demons exist to him. Not like that's gonna cause all of the psychological issues in the future, Johnny. Not just all of the psychological issues. No, let's just be entirely honest with the children as I'm sitting here casting a circle that probably isn't advisable to cast. Johnny, mate, you are an idiot. I love you, but you are an idiot. In the meanwhile, while that's all going on, Rory is bonding with new shapeshifter girl because we have to pretend like the last episode wasn't a complete waste of everyone's time and couldn't have been accomplished in maybe 20 minutes of this episode if we actually knew what the fuck we were doing. And of course, it's to set up for the fact that, of course, she knows all the monsters because she was in the abyss with them. Therefore, this entire enterprise could have been solved by basically bribing her with shit to make her tell. But I digress. But it sets up for the inevitable. She comes in and saves everyone else's asses at the last possible second, so I had to include it somewhere. Speaking of things I inevitably have to stick somewhere in the review for it to make sense, in order to get into the Monster of the Week, we have to backtrack a little bit to something that I accidentally skipped over. Namely, that while they're getting interned as new counselors at this camp, they are faced with hot counselor person who will inevitably turn out to be our Monster of the Week. Spoiler alert. The only other aspect that I'm skipping over is yet another lampshading of the Swamp Thing, where basically the kids play a prank on Ava because she's being a hard ass, and, well, reasons. Therefore, to save myself the rage, I will just mention it briefly in passing here, but rest assured I am raging, and get back to our Monster of the Week, who I will admit is hot enough that I was legitimately sad that he was the Monster of the Week, considering I kind of like the guy. But hey, what can I say? He's hot, and when he's acting, all nice and human and shit, acts basically like a discount Chris Evans Captain America. So, what can I say? I have a weakness for naive hot guys. What of it? Jesus, I just realized this is the second review in a row where I got sidetracked by hotness, or the lack thereof. And we're not judging me, and we're not judging me, and we're moving on. Right, moving on to the Monster of the Week. Said Monster of the Week, of course, being a striga, or, given that it's male, a strigu, a creature of Albanian folklore who, category-wise, is somewhere between a witch, a vampire, and a fairy. And this one is atypical in several ways, given that striga are far more common than strigu, which is why they didn't even deign to give it the proper gender-based pronunciation, and also that this one is quite attractive. I have a feeling they needed an excuse to use some kind of energy vampire, and this was just the most obscure one they could find that vaguely fit. An incubus probably would have made more sense in my opinion, but I'm not here to do your writing job for you, I'm just here to be the proverbial spell checker. Ha ha. Ha ha. The Strigu, rather important to the plot, usually feeds on children and those who are vulnerable, hence the summer camp setting in the first place. Thus, he set up near a summer camp in order to, have a ready supply of food and also to conceal himself. So fine. Prompting Ava and Sarah to take a potion which is far too powerful to be in Constantine's possession, but I presume it's just another one of those things he won up of somebody in a high-stakes game of magical poker to become children for the majority of the episode, to coincide with their Ava needs to gain a childhood memory plot. And I don't care, and we're moving on. It has very little relevance to the overall plot, other than they say that Striga are vulnerable to cayenne pepper, which is something that I have never heard in all of my years researching magical creatures of various different kinds, and things that I personally don't know about the Striga, considering I'm not even sure cayenne would be something that would be available in the portion of Albania where the Striga is most common, nor to most of the eastern parts of the world where that it might have crossed over into. So what the fuck? Most of what I've seen suggest bathing in one of bathing a silver coin in one of the Striga's victims' blood and wearing it as a protective charm, or creating a cross out of pig's bones. Those are the Striga warding things that I have seen recommended on multiple occasions, but I've only been studying this shit for literally 12 years, which is more than half my life. What the fuck would I know? Apologies for digressing again, but Goodfellow's Law. It takes only 3 minutes to spew shit all over the walls. It takes all day to clean up that shit, and there's a lot of shit to clean up here. My point was that without cayenne, the girls will be defenseless. So why on earth they decided to have both of them change and not just one, so as to have the other one protect them, I will never know. They're only, military trained strategists and assassins, so the fuck, I guess. I was able to smart better than they were. Okay? And other Striga related shit that they could have easily used in this episode but didn't. The Striga is meant to have a naturally occurring bout of the evil eye, which is to say, a gaze that can transfix, curse, or hypnotize people, which they could have easily made something out of. I don't know why they didn't. Gotta say, if it were up to me, and you tasked me with writing a story around a Strigu whose thing was to adopt this kind of pseudo Captain America-y nice guy persona, I would say use his hypnotic gaze evil eye powers to make people his obedient thralls and have women swooning over him, and you could even have it so that you could do commentary on the whole heartthrob nice guy thing like Leo in the 90s. Anyone? Social commentary mixed with accurate folklore and also an interesting horror element for a monster? No, just me screaming into the void. Okay then. Irregardless, meanwhile, while Sarah and Ava are getting their female 90s meet cute on, Ray and Johnny are bonding, or at least Ray is trying to bond, and Johnny is doing his "don't fuck with me, you'll end up dying," because everyone I end up caring about dies because reasons, and oh, my probability manipulation abilities probably have something to do with it, but I'm not going to acknowledge that because that would mean having to wean myself off of my innate blood magics. But, now like Johnny is intellectually honest enough to admit that last part. That was just me broadening out the inevitable psychological whines that he does every time someone gets close to him for 5 minutes. But, of course, Ray has an excuse to pine aimlessly over Nora Dark again. Although I will say I admire his ability to compartmentalize his, clear devotions to the sciences, to the very evident fixation he has on liking magic user people. So good on you, Ray. You're the kind of scientist that I wish there were more of in the world. But yeah, you are barking at very much two very, very wrong trees here. What with Constantine and Nora Dark. Because Constantine refuses to develop any particular ability to do anything other than shooting at the hip, and Nora is, well, I don't want to say completely irredeemable because they're probably going to end up redeeming her anyway, but she's not a good match, Ray. Let me play mystical matchmaker for you and just say she's not good for you, dude. Sorry. Anyway, while Ray is stuck in puppy love mode, and we're all, as an audience, coming to that very obvious conclusion, Johnny is trying and failing to cast a locator spell because Ray will not shut up and stop being the bubbly ball of sunshine that he is for long enough for Constantine to focus and chant. And yeah, I empathize. I can imagine how not being able to focus and chant would really bone your casting. Though, when has things that should by rights bone your casting ever bothered you before, Johnny? Or do you just want him to shut up because you want him to shut up? I'm betting it's probably that, because otherwise you would be utilizing that superfluous ease of yours with your innate blood magic to overpower the just fractally broken bullshit lazy casting that you constantly do. So yeah, fuck off, Johnny. Yes, I'm aware that you used a magical excuse, but the magical excuse will not fly with me because it shouldn't apply to you, because it never does apply to you otherwise. So you're just being a dick, which, is fine because you're you, but don't try to pull a fast one on poor Ray here, using a magical excuse for what has a very mundane explanation, namely you want him to shut up because he's annoying. This is a perfectly acceptable state of affairs. You can deal with that. The good news is, by this time, Johnny is fully back in his standard get-up. The bad news is before they've even established that it's a Striga, they've fucked something up that I almost forgot. Because, of course, they fart around playing with the "it's a mystery what we're dealing with" thing for far too long. But while they're investigating, they find a shed skin. Now, my first instinct upon seeing a shed skin, with a tendency to abduct children in the background of my forethought, was basilisk or other snake-like creature. That would have made some kind of sense. But Striga are either witches, vampires, or fairies, depending on which lore you go by. And none of these creatures have a tendency to shed skin. There's a potential they could glamour themselves, but that doesn't involve shedding skin, so the fuck yet again. Anyway, let's skip ahead to the part where they actually know what they're dealing with, because I can't be bothered to fart around like they do. After Johnny's locator spell goes bust, he finally gets bored and summons up a will-o'-the-wisp, which is basically a type of fairy guide spirit, although I don't think I needed to explain that, given the vast majority of people probably have already seen Brave and know, at least in general, what a will-o'-the-wisp is. They're sort of the messenger spirits of the Fae realm. But in this case, he uses it to lead them to the children that have been abducted, and he finds about 5 kids the Striga has been feeding on, which does explain how unnaturally hot he is, presuming that he gets slightly hotter the more life energy he sucks up. Because, of course, as with most parasitic spirits, they take blood as a secondary measure for reasons that I went into in the previous Sabrina episode, where I explained blood magic a little bit more thoroughly, and take life energy primarily. Meanwhile, the time has come for our shape-shifting prisoner friend to be somewhat useful to the plot, so she bribes for favors, and she reveals that the Striga is a male Striga, hence a Strigu, and that he's attractive, so naturally, even though they were thinking that it was the old woman, because when witches come up in these kinds of stories, it's nearly always the old woman, and in their defense, given that they've been dealing with fairy tale creatures, I was half expecting this week's monster to live in a fucking gingerbread house. So, yeah, I can see where they're going with this. But no, it's revealed, and there's an action scene, and I don't care. And meanwhile, again, Johnny and Ray cook up a transference spell to drain the Striga's energy back into the children, and it's mostly well and good, except, of course, one of the kids has a difficulty coming back, and Johnny sacrifices some of his excess life energy back into the kid, which is remarkably stupid, but it's John Constantine, so what do I expect? As for the transference spell, it seems like a fairly bog standard reversal spell for a psychic or energy vampire in general, considering that they used a piece of amethyst, or what appeared to be a piece of amethyst, as the main conduit for the energies, and that stone is known to both be effective as protection against psychic vampirism and also a pretty good energy conduit, particularly for mental energies, so all well and good, although regarding the Striga, considering that I refreshed myself in the research for this, because they did manage to pull out one I wasn't explicitly familiar with off the top of my head, and I had to remind myself what it was. They could have done a much simpler invocation, which involved anointing each of the children's forehead, eyelids, ankles, and wrists, and the center of their stomach with consecrated salt, which would have protected them from the Striga and probably prevented it from sucking any more energy out of them, and then they could have waited for him to starve, and Johnny could have just pulled the energy out of him that way. But, you know, they were coming up at the end of the episode and they didn't have time to introduce a new concept, though they did introduce the transference spell, so the fuck. Anyway, it was kind of interesting to see how much energy Johnny had to end up giving, given that he, being a magic user, has excess life energy to spend, so if it was a normal person, it really would have fucked them over hard. As it stands, he's pretty severely bedridden, enough that they're willing to seek out Nora Dark as a solution, presumably to give him some kind of magical energy transfusion. Guys, that's not how it works. He'll be fine. Just put him in a natural setting, let him pull in some more, and he'll be back to normal in no time. Although, it does amuse me that for the time being, he'll actually have to do his spells the long, hard, long-form way, as opposed to pulling things out of his ass for no explicable reason and bullying the forces of nature into doing what he wants simply by virtue of a surplus of energy. So, haha, Johnny, you actually have to do it the proper way now. And roughly around there is where the episode ends. There's some melodrama about him not losing another kid, and everything's fine and dandy. And next week, we apparently will have a Kraken. So, yay, Kraken. That's cool-ish. Though I'm not sure exactly what Constantine is going to be useful for in that instance, other than banishing the damn thing to hell. And I don't... Actually, this is the first time they didn't actually have to banish it to hell. The Striga basically just evaporated after it was drained of all its life energy that it had stolen from the children, so yay. And on that note, I believe that's the end of this particular episode of A Mystic's Vlogs, and I will see you all at the next Mystic Juncture. Cheers, everyone, and I will see you all next time.